Hello again. This episode is going to be a little bit different to the usual ones because, well, I wasn't originally planning on making this into a video, but as is usual, I had a really simple idea in my head and I decided to overcomplicate it. Anyway, the idea itself was to just paint up a few miniatures that I have lying around, write a short adventure to accompany them, and then, if needed, make a few new bits of terrain to go along with that adventure. So I started off with the miniatures themselves, and they were just leftover models from other projects, or things that I've had lying around for years. Some were models that had parts missing or needed fixing, others were put together from stuff I had in my bits box, and a few of them were just cheap board game pieces that I picked up, well, ages ago. Then, for the adventure, as I say, this was based around the miniatures that you just saw. So that obviously needed a map or two. I've gone with the old classic blue look for these, and I have tried to keep it short and simple. The kind of thing that can be run in a session or two. And since it features evil cultists and undead, one that would be ideal for a Halloween one-shot. And finally, as you would expect, that led me to making a couple of new pieces of scatter terrain. I say new, but they're really just variations of existing stuff. But yeah. As you've probably guessed, the process of making these, that's going to be the main focus of this video, so let's get started with those. Okay then, so in the adventure, there's a defaced statue where the head has been broken off and replaced with the head of a corpse. So the first thing we're going to make is a column for the statue to stand on. And for this, we'll glue this texture to some thin card, but before cutting it out, we'll need to score it along these lines here. Which just makes it easier to bend into this kind of shape when we do cut it out. Next, we'll glue these two textures to some thick or corrugated card, and cut those to size as well. Then, using a glue gun, we'll apply a line of hot glue to the inside top edge of the thin cardboard piece, and glue one of the thicker side pieces into place. And then, do the same thing with the other side piece. There you go. Then it's just a simple matter of adding some more hot glue to the edges of the thicker card, and gluing that kind of thinner flap, gluing that down into place. And then just repeating that on the other side. So that, eventually, we end up with something like this. It's very similar to one of the graveyard pieces from a previous episode. Anyway, next we'll take some thick card, this stuff here is about 2mm thick, and cut that into a 1-inch square. And we'll also need a piece of the stone texture that's big enough to wrap around it, which is what you can see me doing here. First by applying some glue to the back, then sticking the cardboard in the middle, cutting away the excess from all four corners, and then folding the little flaps around the sides, which should result in this kind of thing that you can see here. Though we will need to make two of these, but this second one, that needs to be 3/4 of an inch square. And once we've done all of that, we can then hot glue the bottom of the column to the larger base, like you can see me doing here. And then just using a glue stick or some PVA glue, we can do the same thing with a smaller piece on the top, so that we end up with this kind of thing. And as I say, that's going to be the column on which the statue stands. Right then, for the statue itself, we'll first roughly cut out this texture, and then we'll cut away the excess from the two sides. There you go. Next, we'll take a large drinking straw, the large milkshake variety, and if you're using an old plastic one, I find it's best to rough up the surface with a bit of sandpaper first. Then we can apply some glue to the back of the texture, and carefully wrap that around the straw, so that it ends up looking something like this that you can see here. And we'll put that to one side to dry. Anyway, to speed things up a bit, here's one that I made earlier. And all we're going to do with this is kind of squash it flat down the middle, and then cut the bottom edge nice and straight, but the top edge, we'll need to cut that at a slight angle. Here's a little graphic to show it a bit better, just in case it wasn't too clear on the screen. Anyway, next we'll glue this texture to part of an empty toilet roll tube, just to take advantage of the curve, and then we'll cut that to size with a sharp pair of scissors. Then we'll take the glue gun again and apply a generous amount of glue to the inside of the top of the straw, and then glue the oval into place, so that it overhangs the two sides where the shoulders would be. Basically, we're aiming for this kind of thing. and if possible, try to retain some of the curve of the toilet roll tube if you can. Okay, next we'll take a toothpick or cocktail stick, and from that we'll cut out 3 small pieces that are around 1/4 of an inch long. Then we'll put a small blob of hot glue into the kind of shoulder area, glue one of these into place, and then do the same thing on the other side. And that should result in something like this. As you can see, these are just going to kind of bulk out the area where the arms would be. Now, this last one is optional, but if you like, you could also add a piece at a bit of an angle to represent the rest of the arm, though it's not all that necessary, but yeah, this is how it looks if you do decide to do that. Anyway, next we'll take the cloak texture and some of the plain stone texture that's a little bit bigger, and we're just going to scrunch those up to make them nice and malleable. Then it's just a simple matter of gluing the cloak to the back of the stone pattern so that we end up with this kind of thing, which, when dry, we can then go ahead and cut to size. Then what I like to do is fold that up into a kind of concertina shape and unfold it again, just to make it look a bit more cloak-like. And then we can apply some glue to the longer edge and stick the top corner of the longer side to the middle of the kind of chest area, like so. And then we can start wrapping that around the straw, making sure that the edge of the cloak is pushed up against the oval shoulder piece, while at the same time trying to retain some of those folds and just kind of bending the cloak into a convincing shape as we go along. So this is the kind of thing that we're aiming for, and hopefully that should now look reasonably cloak-like. Though there is one last thing we'll need to do to this, and that's to cut away any overhanging cardboard from that little oval shape on top, just to tidy things up a bit. And there you go, here's how that looks now that that's been done. It's fairly straightforward stuff. Okay, for this next part we'll take another toothpick and enough of the stone pattern to wrap around it, and like I say, glue the texture around the toothpick. Then we'll cut out this pattern exactly to size, and if we apply some glue to the back of that, we can then wrap that around the toothpick, maybe around halfway up, and when that's done, it should hopefully look a little bit like a hand that's holding onto the staff. Then if we take yet another toothpick, we can use the end to kind of bend the left side of the cloak out a little bit, in the area near to the belt, just to make space for us to glue the hand into place, so that it will kind of look as though the hand itself is poking out from inside the cloak. And once we're happy with that, we can add a small blob of glue to the back of the hand and stick that into place, like you can see me doing here. So yeah, that should end up looking something like this. Okay then, now we'll just need to take some cutters or a sharp knife and first cut the toothpick level with the bottom of the straw, and then cut the top to a suitable height, the length of a staff. However, we're not going to throw these bits away, as we can stick one of these in the middle of that kind of shoulder area on top, and as you can see, that will work as a neck, just something to stick the head onto. Speaking of which, that's what we're going to have a go at making next. So, as I mentioned earlier, in the adventure, the cultists have broken off the statue's head and replaced it with the head of a corpse from the graveyard. So, to make this, we'll take a regular sized drinking straw, and the head texture from the PDF, and just like we did with the body, we'll wrap the head texture around the drinking straw so that we end up with this kind of thing. And just like before, we'll fold that in half down the middle of the face, but this time we'll cut both ends at an angle, so that the back is smaller than the front, basically something like you can see here. Then we'll take a 3/4 inch square of scrap paper, and we're just going to scrunch that up into a tiny little ball. So, this kind of thing. And all we're going to do with that is glue it inside the top of the straw. So, after a quick test fit, here I am adding a tiny spot of glue to hold it in place, and then pushing it inside just to give the top of the head a more rounded shape. Basically, something like this. Though I've probably pushed mine down slightly too far in this example, but not to worry. Anyway, next we'll take the hair texture and cut that roughly to size, and it does work best if it's cut a little bit uneven. Next we'll scrunch that up several times to make it nice and malleable, and then I like to cut out 4 or 5 little V-shaped notches around the outside, like you can see me doing here. Something like that. then we'll need to make lots of little cuts all the way around the edge, you know, cuts that are kind of pointing towards the middle of the circle. Hopefully you can see the kind of thing that I mean on the screen. And then, being careful not to rip the piece, we'll apply some glue to the back and try to stick that to the top of the head so that the front folds down to form a kind of fringe, or bangs if you prefer, and the back folds down and covers most of the back of the head. And if you like, you can then take a toothpick and try to arrange it so that there's gaps between the hair in a few places, you know, just by separating the paper between some of those cuts that we made earlier. And while that can be a little bit fiddly, if we take our time, that should result in this kind of thing. Something that resembles the head of a zombie, which is exactly the kind of look that we're going for with this piece. Anyway, if I bring in all of the pieces that we've just made, all that's left to do is glue them all together. So we'll start that off by cutting the neck to a suitable height, like you can see me doing here, and we can then apply a spot of hot glue to the top of the neck and glue the head into place, and I think it works best if it's glued on at a bit of an angle, you know, something like this, so that it kind of looks as though it's just resting on top. Then we'll take the glue gun again and fill the bottom of the statue with some more hot glue, and then stick that on top of the column and try to get it roughly centralised. And that should end up looking something like this. And admittedly, it is an oddly specific piece to be making, but if you check out the adventure at the back of the PDF, you'll hopefully see why it'll be handy to have this piece represented on the tabletop. But yeah, in addition to the defaced statue, I've also included a dungeon tile, which I've just stuck to some thick card, and that represents a kind of ritual or magic circle. Though I have trimmed around 1mm off all four sides, just so that it will fit inside one of the 2.5D dungeon tiles that I've already got made. You know, rather than having to make a whole new tile that's likely to only ever get used once. And while I'm on the subject of dungeon tiles, if you haven't made any yet and you'd like to make some 2.5D tiles that will work for this particular adventure, then I have tried to design the dungeon with that in mind. So a good way to do this would be to print off 5 sheets of one of the floor patterns. There's several to choose from, but I've gone with the plain one from the Dungeon Build Along series. And as I say, you'll need 5 of these, and after gluing them to some cardboard or foam core or whatever, you'll need to cut them into these shapes. So you'll probably need to come back and pause the video here, if you are planning on making these. But yeah, once those have been cut to size, you can then glue the walls into the position shown here on the screen, and if you're new here, then you can see how I make all of the basic tiles in several of my other videos. I'll try to remember to put a link in the top corner to one of those. So, assuming you've gone ahead and made all of these tiles, that should be enough to make the first half of the map, as you can see. And when the players get deeper into the dungeon, you can simply start swapping out some of the earlier tiles to make the new rooms and passages. And I've designed it so that all of the tiles from the first half, they can be repurposed to build all of the second half, like you can see here. Though, I suppose you could build twice as many tiles if you really wanted to, and lay the entire dungeon out in one go, but I kind of like the idea of keeping the amount of tiles needed to a minimum, and like I say, building the dungeon in 2 halves, like I've shown here with the 2 different colours. But, as you can see, we will end up with a few exits in the main rooms that don't actually lead anywhere, like this one here, but we can easily block those off with some of the drain inserts, which can be found in Season 2 of the Dungeon Build Along, or in the Requests PDF. Again, I'll put a link in the description. And yeah, I think that's everything covered. There's the tile inlay that you can see here on the screen right now, there's the defaced or desecrated statue that you can make, and there's also a graveyard themed adventure to go along with it all. So, all that's left to say is thanks for watching. Seeing as how this has been a slightly different video to my usual stuff, it would be good to know what you actually think of this one, and here's the part where I should probably mention Patreon and liking the video and all that nonsense, but yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.